Good evening and welcome to Doc and Sock with Doris on the line. It is good to be in the studio this afternoon as we continue to celebrate February as Black History Month, and we talk about the difference between civil rights history and black history. And there is a tremendous difference in those two subjects. And so we want to, as a result of this program, and as a result of the guests that we bring, we want to merge the two together. We don't want to just talk about civil rights history when it comes to black folk, because as Doc said earlier, we just don't want to think about a time when we had to be submissive and were beat down and gunned down. We want to think about a time when we were actually kings and queens in charge of the civilization, builders and producers. We want to be known for that more so than the person that had to fight his way through the efforts of the Ku Klux Klan in Mississippi. So we're going to continue to bring you these kinds of stories and this kind of information. Now, Mississippi, my hometown, I always say Mississippi is just a town. We have less than 3 million people in this state, and 40+% of those are African American. Now you gotta know that when you have that greater population of black folks in one place, that you're gonna have some trouble, you're gonna have some dissension, you're gonna have some issues that others do not face. Now it could be that if we ever learn to come together, if we ever learn to work together, that we could use our great numbers and build something remarkable, something beautiful, something that transcends the times and the past that we've come through into something that is marvelous in the future. And as we're going to discuss tonight, we have done that in the past, and Doris has been on fire with the fact that we have overcome that every obstacle, and she says that if you give us half a chance, we will excel in everything that we do. So we're going to continue those conversations, but tonight it's a real special night for me. We have in our studio Dennis Damer, the son of Vernon Damer, and we're going to talk about him. We're going to talk about his family. We're going to talk about his father. We're going to talk about Mississippi. You know, Mississippi can't celebrate, but it can't hide from its history. And until we put it on the table and embrace what happens in Mississippi, then we can never get past it. And we do want the day to come when race is not a factor in the state of Mississippi, nor in this country. Whereas Martin cried out for and begged for, where every man could be judged by the content of his character and not the color of his skin. We do want to get to that point in society, in this world, all across this nation. Now, if you're watching us on Facebook, we want you to share this program with your friends and family. We want you to subscribe, send us stars. We need your support. We need your help. This work is tremendously important, and we're willing to pay the price to bring these programs to you where you won't hear them anywhere else. No one else is going to be carrying this conversation. Now, if you're watching us on YouTube, then we need you to subscribe to that channel. We're growing there every day. We hit every category that they've asked us to hit except the viewing hours, and we're working on that diligently. We have over 2,000 videos in the library, and we're producing more every day. We have over 2,000 subscribers, and we're growing every day. And so I send shouts out to Roland Martin and let him know there's a new kid on the block, but we're coming your way soon. And so we need your support there. Now, if you're watching us on WeBelieveDigital.com, our very own platform, you know that we're different. We're not a page, we're a platform. You can go there and find some of the best gospel singing. You can find some of the best preaching. You can find sports talk. You can find hot topics. And if you scroll down a little bit further, you will find WBLV Radio, our very own internet radio station, where on Wednesdays and Friday night, HT3 will bring you some of the best Southern soul that you ever want to hear. And then Boogie out of Miami is also bringing Southern soul. We're changing our program slightly to include more gospel music, and we're looking forward to George Winford and his kind coming over to help program our station. So it's a pleasure for us to be in the studio today with our guest, but let me introduce again my co-host, a man that is one of the most sought-after speakers in this country, Dr. Eldridge Henderson. He's a dangerous man because he was born on a Mississippi plantation. And like I always say, someone had to put him in a basket and set him afloat in the river like Moses to try to save his life during that time. But somehow he escaped. Now, why do I call him dangerous? Because he is Dr. Eldridge Henderson, meaning that he is book smart, but he is street smart, and he has not only the knowledge from having learned, but having lived. Dr. Henderson, how have you been, sir?
I've been fine, sir, and thank you for those remarks.
Well, it's always good to have you in the studio. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself again.
Well, most of you know that I'm an old former plantation resident. We lived on a plantation in the Delta and Hinds County, Mississippi for 17 years. And I was able to get off that plantation when I turned about 18 years of age. And I tell Socrates all the time that it really ruined my plans for the future of that plantation, because when I finished the 8th grade, I had a job on the plantation. They were very kind to us. They offered me $2 a day and a house, and my job was to bale hay, fix the fence, and do anything else that I was told. And ladies and gentlemen, one of the worst things happened to me at the time that I just couldn't understand. I was also told when I turned 16, I would be able to get a used car and probably could go down the road and get me a wife. During those days, back in the 50s, you didn't have to marry unless you wanted to, because traditionally all you had to do is select someone and get with them. But something happened that changed my life. They opened up a black high school in rural Hinds County. It was called Sumner Hill High School, 9th grade through the 12th grade. And my parents made me turn my job down, forget about my house and my potential wife and that used car I was going to get, and demanded that I go to school. That hurt my heart, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't even understand how significant that was. I was totally brainwashed because I wanted to do like the other young men that I knew that lived in the Hinds County area. There was honky-tonkin' every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night, and on and on. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I get angry when I talk about how stupid I was. But those things happen to a lot of people that have been brainwashed and love others more than they love themselves. And I'm talking about the human enemies of mankind, and think they have done something good for you. I need prayer, Mr. Socrates, and I want you and your bishop to pray for me.
Well, I'm certainly going to make the request on your behalf. Our other host, Doris Lewis, is also on the line. Doris, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a native Jacksonian. I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, went to elementary school, high school, Jim Hill, Tougaloo College, and got my master's from Jackson State. And I taught school in Mississippi, and I was a high school counselor in Canton, Mississippi. And I moved to Wisconsin, and I was a high school counselor there. And I ended up in Chicago as a teacher and a counselor, and I retired from the Chicago Public School System in 2005. And so Jackson is very, very dear to me. When I was away, I would come back home 2 or 3 times a year, because Jackson is where I got my foundation. Jackson is where I learned everything that I know today in terms of coming up as a young girl, teenager, and a young woman. I got my foundation from the people in my community. They, along with my family, helped to raise me. That's when we always talk about the extended family. Well, that's what I grew up under in Jackson, Mississippi. Got a very good education at Jim Hill High School, with excellent education. So that's basically what my life is all about.
Doris, we have the privilege to have a guest in the studio this evening that I'm going to get right into. Now, in Mississippi history and black history and history all over this world, when it comes to dealing with black folk, some have paid the price more than others. In Mississippi, we are always talking about Medgar, Martin, Fannie Lou Hamer, and the likes of those people. And they paid a tremendous price that black folks would have an opportunity to get out of slavery and to get out of the oppression that they were experiencing every day. But one of the gentlemen that we're talking about tonight, Vernon Dahmer, a civil rights activist in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, was absolutely gunned down and murdered in Hattiesburg because he was trying to help black folks register to vote. And so we don't talk enough about Mr. Dahmer and the sacrifice that that family made and the sacrifice that he made, giving his life for the advancement of black folk in Mississippi. And we're going to do a little bit better by recognizing individuals that have not got the proper recognition for the contribution that they made. So this evening we have the pleasure to have his son, Dennis Dahmer, in the studio with us. And we want to know about yourself, Dennis. We want to know about your father. We got people listening and viewing all over the world, from China to Nigeria to New York City. Our viewing audience is worldwide.
Okay.
They don't know about you and your father. Tell us a little bit about who Dennis and Vernon Dahmer really are.
Okay. I'll start with my dad. Okay. My dad was many things. Civil rights was just part of it. My dad was about the 5th generation in a family that can trace their history back to a time before the state of Mississippi was founded in that area. Okay? That background is a biracial background. So if you look at the folks who were in my dad's generation, they were African American, they were Indian, probably at least 2 different Indian tribes, primarily out of, I believe, northeast Georgia and the Carolinas. Okay? They were Irish and they were German. Okay? And that was the basic mix of what my dad came out of. When he came along, as I mentioned, he was like the 5th generation. So we're talking about a family that has been involved in doing what people did in Mississippi. Okay, cotton farming. We did a lot of cotton farming for that part of Mississippi. Probably farmed around about 200 acres. Most of that was cotton. And my dad, he's like 4th, 5th generation doing this stuff, okay? We were in the timber business. My family actually owned a sawmill and a planer mill that we operated, plus we had logging crews. My dad was in the cattle business, had a large herd of cattle, over 100 head, okay? He also owned a grocery store, a rural country grocery store that he established probably, and I'm guesstimating, probably in the 30s or the 40s. And the reason he did that was to fill a need where black people could go and shop and be treated with respect, not call out of their name, not have to stop and wait just because somebody of another race walked in the store. Okay? He didn't operate like that. Now, in those businesses that he ran, the customer base varied racially. Okay? That store, probably 60% or more black, The other 30% white. That sawmill operation that he ran, customers in that, at least 75% white. Okay? The cotton business, where he's doing like everybody else that were large farmers, they selling it into the gins, into the wholesalers, the people that operated those businesses, okay? Same thing with the cattle. In terms of hiring people to work, my dad will hire anybody, okay? Anybody that wanted to work. Whether they be black, white, whatever, he didn't care. Because that was the environment that he came up out of. Now, that provided a base for him, an economic base that gave him some degree of independence. He was fortunate to have that base because that allowed him to get involved in things like civil rights. He could be a public advocate because this was a guy that's employing people. Can't really fire him, okay? He's self-sufficient. But there are ways that they can get back at you. And I'm talking about things that I saw as a small kid, 10 or 12 years old, okay? Banks that you would go and make loans, crop loans were typical for farmers of that side. They just walk in the bank, tell the banker, hey, I need X number of thousands of dollars. The guy says, sure, just sign right here. That was it, okay? I saw him actually do these kind of things, okay? Now, when the group known as the White Citizen Council started to clamp down on him, all of a sudden, those banks couldn't loan him money anymore. Had nothing to do with his credit. The fact that he was involved in civil rights, okay? In fact, it got to be so funny that at one time, other blacks would go to the bank try and borrow money, and they didn't have the collateral. They would tell them, the bankers would tell them, say, hey, go see that guy Vernon Dame out there in Kelly Settlement. See if he'll co-sign it for you. You know, that kind of stuff. Older brothers. I had 6 older brothers. All 6 of my older brothers served in the U.S. military. The ones that are in my generation, they served for over 75 years. Out of that 6, 5 of them were drafted through this local selective service board controlled by local whites. That was another way they got back at him. He would buy insurance on the house. They would write him a policy, find out who he was, cancel the policy, send a check back in the mail. Okay? So he's operating this farm like anybody else, and he's mechanized, and he's upgrading, so he did something. He bought a cotton picker. The mere fact that he bought a cotton picker set the segregationists and the racists off. They started to call and threaten him because he was able to buy a cotton picker and they couldn't. They thought he was trying to show off. He's not trying to show off. He got fields of cotton. He got to get out. People not working anymore picking cotton, so he did what you're supposed to do. So my dad was that type person. He wasn't a radical type person. He believed in America, and he definitely believed that America could be better, okay? And he was willing to work toward that by encouraging people to get involved and to vote. And if you're not from that era, it's probably hard for a lot of young people to just realize the amount of courage that it would take for an individual of color to even attempt to register, knowing that they wasn't going to allow you to register. But just the mere fact you would attempt to do it could put your name on a list where all of a sudden you could get fired from whatever job you had, talked down to, threatened, just for trying to register to vote. Okay? During that era, I think they had something like 5 or 6 registered black voters in Forest County. thousands of black people there. Okay? You had people trying to register to vote who were college students. They couldn't pass that subjective test. Okay? You had people who were professional people, dentists, pharmacists. Okay? They can't pass the test. Educators, they can't pass the test. Nobody black is passing the test because it was subjective. Then to make it even worse, you had to pay this poll tax, which was like $2. And I heard Professor Henderson here talk about when he came up in the 40s, having a guaranteed job of $2 a day. So $2, even in the 50s, was a lot of money. So no one is willing to just go and throw their money away when you don't have money. So my dad pushed voting rights. He worked with the different activist groups. He was an NAACP guy. When SNCC came to Mississippi and they got involved in trying to register people to vote, the first 2 SNCC workers that came to Forrest County lived with us on the farm. Okay, they did. One of them recently passed, Hollis Watkins, and Curtis Hayes. They were the first 2 that came. They lived with us. My dad pretty much bankrolled them because they weren't making any money. Gave them a vehicle to use, and then he carried them around and introduced them to key people in the black community who were interested in building a movement. And there was a movement already in Hattiesburg, but when the young people got involved, primarily through SNCC, as they did here in Jackson, that's when things started to really move. You know, when you got young people who are proactive and they're willing to challenge the system, they're willing to go to jail, they're willing to march, and they know the danger of doing that. So I said all that to say this, and I'm going to shut up and turn it back over to Hollis. To Socrates. Today in Mississippi, just based upon that history that I laid out, every black person should be registered and should be voting. I'm not trying to turn you into an activist, but we all need to be registered and we need to be voted. Earlier, you heard Socrates state that black population percentage in Mississippi is something like 38-40%. I believe it's actually higher than that. I believe it's into the low 40s. So if we focus on turning our people out the way we need to turn them out the way they turned out the last time Obama ran, okay? If we were turning out like that now, we'd have a different governor and we'd have a different U.S. senator. If folks had just went and voted in the numbers that they voted the last time that Obama ran. So we have the power. We just need to get proactive. We need to get out of this mindset, this defeatist attitude, into one like Obama and them used to say, yes, we can. Because yes, we can, because in Mississippi, we actually have the power at 38-40% or more. And we go out and build some coalitions with some other folks, we can win elections. So I'm going to shut up right there, because I could go on.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. We needed that history, and we were going to deal with it even more.
Yeah.
Now, Doc, you gave me a piece of paper here that says that James Meredith was shot in 1966 in a march. And also here I'm looking, and it says that voting rights activist Vernon Damer murdered January 10, 1966. How hot was it in Mississippi, Doc? This is from one end of the state to the other end of the state, and both of these great men are being gunned down in the same year.
Well, that's a fact. I remember both of those incidents. It was very popular. It was so popular and so scary until even the so-called, now you hear me use the word so-called white folks, were afraid to protest. Those that pretend they were Christian Bible toters. The sheriffs, the city council, and most of the business leaders were dictators. They were in power, didn't want to share it, and they declared among themselves that they are going to dominate, kill, steal, rape, murder, do anything to retain their power. And they used the poor white folks and the Uncle Tom black people to stay in power up until today. TODAY, which is, I believe it's February the 29th, 2024. The changes that have taken place, Mr. Socrates and Mr. Damon, are almost insignificant as far as economics, politics, and economic development are concerned in this state. Status quo. That's basically what it is. People don't want to believe it. Voting is even worse than it was back in the Reconstruction period. Black folks voted then. They died to vote. These Negroes now, you can't pay them to vote. You can pay them not to vote. Man, I'm telling you, it happens. I don't want to say anything else about it.
All right.
Makes me angry.
Okay. Don't get angry. Doris, 1966, I was a student at Alcorn State University, and Highway Patrol came and ran us out of the dorm and whipped us down real good, running out of the dorm. Jackson State had the murder of Mr. Brown and Green over there at Jackson State University in that period. Where were you, Doris, in that period?
Well, first of all, let me say that it is an honor to be talking to Mr. Damon's son. I was a member of the West Jackson NAACP Youth Council under Medgar Evers. I remember when your father was killed like it was yesterday. He was a very brave man to be doing what he was doing during that time. And the NAACP of his time and of Medgar's time is not the NAACP of today. Socrates, I participated in every demonstration we had in Jackson, Mississippi during the time Medgar was over the NAACP. You know, we were teenagers, we were kids. So we you know, when you're teenagers, when you're kids, you're not afraid of anything. You know, the way Medgar had it laid out, we had certain times during the day that we would go to Walgreens or we would go to Woolworth. And I remember the day that my group was supposed to go to Walgreens. That's the day when they closed the store down because we were all ready to go to jail. So, you know, we were some courageous young people. So the NAACP I grew up under, it was at one time dear to my heart because these were some courageous men and women. Those were very dangerous times. We knew we could be killed. We knew anything could happen to, and most of it happened to us. And most of the time, our parents didn't even know where we were. But we were determined to participate in that event, that struggle during that time. So, sir, it is an honor for me to hear your voice and be able to talk to someone whose father gave his life to make Mississippi a better place and the United States of America a better place. It is unfortunate that it's worse today than it was just about during the time your dad was over the NAACP in Hattiesburg.
Now, Doris makes a great point. Times have not gotten better for black people. We own less land than Mr. Damon owned. I heard Dennis say that he had a tremendous farm. He bought cotton pickers. He had grocery stores. He was a man on the move, making things happen. Doc, your generation probably dropped the ball because we didn't continue that great legacy of being a producer. What happened?
Well, the part that I contributed was I was from the old school where I loved hard work and were taught to love my enemies. And we were also taught that if you don't love your enemies will kill you, and you know who they are. And that was my first early knowledge about human enemies of mankind. We knew who the Klan members were. We knew when they would go out and kill somebody or burn down the houses or the churches, because we knew their vehicles. We knew the tag numbers on those trucks and old raggedy cars. We knew the sheriff, the police people, because many of those folks were involved with the black community, and Mr. Damer can tell you they would go around and buy whiskey, mess with the prostitutes in police uniform.
Yep,
Am I right, sir?
absolutely.
And they had children all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you, I was in those situations when I worked at a little honky-tonk in Hinds County. And of course, I'm not going to get into the details because some of the relatives of those police officers are still in law enforcement. And that's why I say, when you look at the human enemies of mankind, gentlemen, you are dealing with 6 generations of European Americans and their relatives and financial supporters, and they're the same people. But those that are alive today pretend that they had nothing to do with that kind of mess, and they didn't benefit.
Didn't benefit. And
And
that's the biggest lie.
in the history of the world.
Absolutely.
Now, Dennis, Dennis, your father house was burned down with
Right.
y'all in it.
Right. Right.
I mean,
Right.
let's think about this. Now, you guys were in the house.
Absolutely. Just to give you a little history leading up to that. So, the white community and my dad, from the community in Forest County, Hattiesburg, had like a love-hate relationship. They loved the business things that my dad did. But the civil rights stuff, it was a real problem for them, okay? Now, I wasn't an active participant in the civil rights movement. When my dad was killed, I was 12 years old, less than a month from turning 13. So I'm around, and I got to see a lot of things. I can remember the threatening phone calls. They would call the house, and it wasn't uncommon for white people to call our house because of the business my dad's in. He's selling timber and all this other stuff. So they calling all the time. And they would call, and my mother would answer the phone, and they'd ask for my dad. And she said, "Oh, he's not here right now. Can I get your name and number? And he'll call you back." They said, "No, you just tell that N-word, we're going to kill him." All right? Stuff like that. I can remember as a small kid getting up. The country store that we ran was less than 100 yards from the house that my great aunt ran for my dad. She lived in an apartment attached to the back of it. I walked around there, and big picture windows shot out. Okay, so I'm like 10 and 11 years old, and I know that there are people that don't like my dad, but I don't know who they are, because we got everybody on this place. You know, they coming to buy timber, they coming to trade at the store. So you really don't know, but I can remember things like that, okay? I can remember instances where members of the White Citizen Council would call my dad on the phone, and they'd get so pissed off. So when I'm coming out there to talk to you, he said, "Come on out here." And they'd come out there, and I mean, they would be really upset, okay? Because the thing that didn't make sense to them, they said, "Why are you doing this? What is it that you hope to gain that you don't have already right now?" And of course, my dad would tell them, say, "Hey, it's about voting, and we need to get more people registered, especially because they are taxpayers like everybody else. They pay taxes, so they deserve to be treated the same, okay?" And of course, they wasn't going for that, all right? And but there was a period of harassment that went on for years. Now, when that harassment was going on, my family maintained armed guards, at all times, 24/7. A lot of those armed guards were my older brothers that was drafted into the military. So if my dad went anywhere in town, he never went along. He got 2 or 3 of his sons there with him, and all of them armed, because they are prepared. They understand what these people are capable of doing. We're not living in fear of the Klan. We're prepared for the Klan. So what happened to us is Johnson signs the Civil Rights Bill, okay, in 65, somewhere along in there. So the threatening phone calls stop. So when the threatening phone calls stopped, we let our guards down. And by that time, most of my older brothers drafted, they're in the military, okay? I'm 12. One older brother just got back from the military. So when they stopped the threatening calls, we let our guard down. And when that happened, they surprise attacked us about 2 o'clock in the morning with 2 carloads of armed Klansmen. They attacked the store, which was operated by my great aunt, who was in her 80s, okay? Shooting it up, setting it on fire, another carload attacking the house. My mother hears the car coming in the driveway. This is after Megger had been killed. So my dad had gravel, loose gravel, put in the driveway, so at night you could hear the cars running through that gravel. So my mother heard that. She could hear the car doors opening and closing, and she woke my dad and said, "Vernon, I believe they got us this time." So we were an outdoors family. We had plenty of guns. Any bedroom you went in, there were at least 3 or 4 guns loaded. My dad bought ammunition by the cases, okay? Bought it by the cases. So we were armed and we were well prepared, but we had nobody there to operate the guns. And plus, they caught us when our guard was down. But yet, with all of that, my dad jumps up, grabs the shotgun. He starts running through the house. Klansmen shooting in the house, shooting the windows out, throwing gas in by the jugs. He's running from door to window, shooting at them. But he's not just shooting at anything. He's trying to get a clear shot. Because my dad was a really good shot, excellent bird hunter. Excellent bird hunter, So he's a good shot. And he empties 2 or 3 guns, running through that house. By that time, they've torched the gas, so he's running through the flames, shooting at them. The Klansmen thought, this is what they told the FBI when they started confessing, trying to make a deal at the end, before they went to trial. They said, hey, they thought it was more than one person in the house shooting back at them. And they panicked. And one of the things they wasn't supposed to do was turn the headlights on their cars, because they had coasted into the yards with the engines off, no headlights on. So they got nervous, and one of them turns the headlights on one of the cars. The other Klansmen see it. So the Klansmen actually start shooting at one another. So they shooting at one another in the yard. My dad's shooting at them, and he drives 2 carloads of Klansmen off that property. One guy. Now, I slept through the whole thing, never woke up. I was in the back bedroom as well as one of my older brothers. Never heard a shot. How long were they there? I don't believe they were on that property 5 minutes, maybe, before they left. But it was long enough for them to shoot the windows out, throw the gas jugs in that they'd punctured holes in. And this is what they testified and said they did, okay? Throw the torches in. But when they left, one of the cars was shot up so bad, it was running on the rim on the asphalt road. So when the FBI get there the next morning, they see the trail, and they followed up Monroe Road about 4 miles into Jones County, and there's the car abandoned, shot up. So they had the car. They knew who the owner was, the car was. They was able to find out that. And they had a pretty good idea what group of the Klan had done it. It had to be the one out of Jones County. There was a Klan in Forest County. They didn't like my dad either, but they would not physically attack him. They would shoot the windows out in the store. They'd make the threatening phone calls. They'd shoot the mailbox off the post. hang a noose in a tree down the road, but they never ever burn a cross on our place because they didn't want to get that close to us. I had one of my older brothers tell us, when things were really hot, they'd stay up all night. And one time they were sitting up there in that sawmill about early hours of the morning. This car pulls up, starts shooting the windows out of the store. And my brother was ready to return fire. My dad wouldn't let him do it. He said, no, don't do that. Because you shoot back at them and we kill them, they're going to convict us for killing them, even though we're defending our own property. Okay?
Wow.
That's the kind of environment that you lived under. Same thing happened to, who was it, Hartman Turnbow? Up there where they tried to burn him out, up there in Lexington, and he ran them off in his place. Then the local sheriff comes out and arrests him.
That's right.
Said that he was trying to incite a riot because he defended himself.
Wow.
So that's the kind of system you lived under. So they sneak attacked us. That's why they were able to do what they did. But they never shot my dad. He had no bullet holes in him. Okay? He died from asphyxiation, which is his bronchial respiratory system was burned on the inside from running through those flames that he had inhaled. That's what killed him. Okay?
So how did your mom, and tell us a little bit about your mom. I mean, how did she stay with a man during that tumultuous time? How did that woman raise her children to stay in that environment?
Well, it was a very difficult time, and all I can say is my mother truly loved my dad, okay? And she probably didn't know all this much about him, and the civil rights part, until she'd actually married him, but she'd lived in that community for a couple of years, so she had a good idea who he was. In fact, my dad had hired her to teach in the local Rosenwald school that we still have there on the property, okay? So it was a tough time, but my mother comes from Jasper County, outside of Rose Hill, in a community known as Teoc, which was another one of these black communities of farmers. So she come up out of that lifestyle. She had seen racism and segregation there. Black people just showing up dead, being killed for no reason other than the fact they were black, or being robbed. She always told the story of this one black lady that worked for this white family as they cook, okay? And she's living in a house on their property. And her sons have moved away to Chicago somewhere, and they sending money back to her, to Mama. And Mama undoubtedly told these white folks she was working for that she had this money, and two of those sons killed her. Killed her. The lady that's taking care of them. They just show you just how worthless some people are.
How much time they serve in jail?
According to my mother, they were eventually arrested and sent to Meridian, Harris County. Spent some amount of time there, not a whole lot, maybe days or a week. Then they came back, and that was the end of it.
Wow.
That was the end of it.
Doris. Doris, you there?
Yeah, I'm here, yes.
I know that our time is running near, but I know how passionate you are, and your feelings and thoughts about what you just heard.
I'm a little emotional because nothing has really changed. We're dealing with the same things today. The same identical things today. We're talking about the descendants of these people who are the same as their grandfather, grandmother, great-grandfather, great-grandmother. These are the children of today. So we're dealing with the same things. There's no justice in America for black people. There's no justice in America for black men. Black men are still catching hell. We're all catching hell, but particularly the black men, because the black man is the greatest threat to white people, white men, than any other race of people on this earth. So we're still dealing with it. Nothing has changed.
Time is,
It's worse.
but I know you're very passionate about this bill that was just recently introduced in the legislature that could possibly close several HBCUs. What's your thought on that?
None of the HBCUs should be closed. Mississippi Valley State had almost a 17% increase in student enrollment, the highest than any state school in the state of Mississippi. So if they want to close a school, close the Mississippi State School for Women, close the white schools. We cannot allow these people to close one historically black college in the state of Mississippi or any place else in the South. Because if we do, it's like a death knell for education for young black boys and girls. We cannot allow that. As I said, Mississippi Valley State has almost a 17% enrollment. The Mississippi State School for Women, they had a decrease. So if you want to close the school, close that school. Not Mississippi Valley State, not Jackson State, not Alcorn State. This is our future that these people are talking about doing. Here, there's another nail that is still driving into our demise. We cannot allow it. We must be just like this gentleman's father. We have got to resist these people with every fiber we have in our body. And we can do it. Mississippi is 40% of the population. The thing that's going to save us is this high population, high concentration, where black people are highly concentrated. We just got to come together. We've got to force these black politicians to do what they need to do to represent us so we can become economically empowered. And if they can't, they're not doing it. So we're going to have to focus on taking them out and putting people in there who will be like Medgar Evers, who will be like Mr. Dahmer, who will be like me. I've been fighting since I was 14 years old, and I will be fighting until God decides He wants me to come on. That's the position. Every job I had in Mississippi, I was fired.
Wow.
Every school that I taught in Mississippi, when they integrated the school system there, I was fired because I refused to allow those white, racist devils in Mississippi abuse and misuse and disrespect and dehumanize black children. I do not regret any position I took then or any position I take today because it's about the survival of our people and the future of our children. That's what this is all about.
Wow. Doc, Doc is very passionate. We are not allowed to teach the critical race theory in Mississippi. And after listening to Mr. Dahmer's story and talking about his family, I get it. I understand why the governor, don't want it taught in Mississippi. But should it be taught, Doc?
Of course it should be. It ought to be taught in three places. In the home first, in the church second, and then in the school. Introduced in home, taught in the church, demanded to be taught in school, and continue to do it, whether it's legal or not. I don't blame white folks for not wanting to hear anything about critical race theory because they will hear the same thing that Mr. Dahmer just talked about. They'll hear the experiences that I went through from age 3 up until today that I can remember. And that's bad news. What child you want to tell that your daddy and grandmother, your sister, and all for the last 4 generations killed people took advantage of people's rights, and did everything else that I mentioned earlier and Mr. Damon mentioned, boy, that'll hurt the heart. You have so many people committing suicide and hating their parents and themselves until it would be historical. They would have to have psychiatrists come into Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, and have sessions every weekend to keep suicide from exploring itself to the point where it's a disaster.
Wow.
It killed thousands. That sounds strong, but the history is so horrific. When you look at all aspects of institutional racism, Mr. Damer, from his experience, can talk about the economic situation, the religious situation, social situation. He knows the name of the people. He used to see them and talk to them. I had the same experience. Same with what Doris talked about, working with the NAACP. Mr. Everest there, when I was up there in Jackson in the early 60s. But they kicked me out of there. I'm not going to go on that. They kicked me out, Mr. Damon. We'll talk about it one day. But that's the story, man. It's tough being in America. And when you hear people say that, what those Negroes, they call us
now.
They call us ends at home.
Mm-hmm.
What those Negroes worried about? They are freed. They got affirmative action. They had no affirmative action for blacks. The affirmative action has always been for white folks, Mr. Damer and Mr. Socrates. They still have it. It is affirmed that they get the first $99 out of 100, and you might give blacks 50% of that dollar that's left and take the other 50% before they get it.
Wow. Doc, let me ask Mr. Damon.
Yeah.
Having grown up and lived through that experience, do you find hate in your heart? How do you reconcile and find peace?
Well, it's a very good question. It wasn't very easy for me, okay? My dad had this saying in so many words. He said, you got good people and bad people in every race, okay? All black folks ain't saints, and all of the other folks are not necessarily evil, okay? You try and find the good ones and know who the other ones are.
That's right. That's exactly
So you know you need to deal with them at arm's length. But back to your question. It was very difficult for us as a family, emotionally, financially, okay? When you lose the person who is the icon, the guy that makes everything happen, okay? And you don't realize how much you truly miss him until that void is there. So I had some tough times. I went from being an honor roll student to, as some of my classmates described it to me later on, they said, well, when you came back to school, you was just a different person. And I was. Very quiet, didn't have a whole lot to say. A lot of times I just couldn't focus because this thing was in my mind, okay? Of what I had experienced firsthand, and didn't have to go to all these trials after it. Sat in the courtroom hearing the same testimony over and over. You got a guy who was there that night. There was an eyewitness participant tied to the crime scene by a gun that he dropped in the yard when he got nervous. Went off and left his gun, dropped his pistol.
Right.
So you know he's there. He names everybody else. So even with all of that, you got about 14, 16 indicted for, having some involvement in it, okay, on state and federal charges. But out of that, only about 6 or 7 actually went to trial. And out of that, you got like maybe, I think, 3 convictions, plus the guy that turned state evidence that pleaded guilty. And then that's for crimes like arson, It ain't for premeditated murder, which is what it was. Okay? So, and people try and tell me about, America's this and that. I said, well, we're trying to get to that America. It's not that America for everybody. Okay? Now, you can look at it through rose-colored glasses or whatever. But segregation was a clear line. Horizontally, vertically and horizontally. You either lived above segregation, above that line, or you lived below it. And if you live below it, it's an entirely different world than what was going on above it. Okay? So, very difficult times. Hey, I went to college, struggled my first 2 years because just trying to deal with this thing in my mind. Thank God there was a Jackson State. And when I got to Jackson State, I felt better about myself. And graduated from there in about 1975 with a degree in biology and about 8 hours from having a minor in chemistry. So I'm glad that Jackson State was there. And like Miss Lewis was saying, we don't need to be talking about closing any institution of higher learning, any community college, any trade school. We don't need to be talking about closing any of that in Mississippi. In fact, we need to open up more of them, all right, so that we can get this population, everybody, black and white, in better shape to get, hopefully, better opportunities. We've had some industry come into this state. The Nissan guys, you probably know more about them. I do Socrates. I certainly hope there was some black folks that got in there on the business side. I only know of one individual who owned a business that was a supplier to them. Hopefully there were some other ones. Okay, I'm talking about a major supplier. I come from the business world, and I do this farming thing now, the nostalgia, but eventually I'm going into some kind of business here in Mississippi.
I want you to tell the people
Yeah.
something right quick.
Sure.
I know we have time,
Yeah.
limited time, but I don't care nothing about the time.
Yeah.
I want you to share with the people, as you were sit up in those trials,
Yeah.
time after time,
Right.
you tell the listeners and the viewers, what role did the federal government play in this prosecution as you remember?
Okay. The investigation into my dad's murder was really conducted by the FBI, okay? With assistance primarily from the Mississippi Highway Patrol, okay? Now you have to understand, this is after the killings in Philadelphia, which prompted the FBI to put an office in Jackson. So this FBI has got this love-hate relationship with black folks. They don't like black activists. The history clearly states that, the things they tried to do to sabotage black people. So the FBI headed that investigation. At that time, their directive was find these guys and let's prosecute them. And they did a good job of finding them because they had informants in the Klan, okay? I had a reputable news reporter from that era who covered this case. Not going to call his name. He said, hey, after your dad was killed and the FBI had set up an office in Hattiesburg where they took over a whole wing of a brand new Holiday Inn motel. They wanted nothing to do with the local law enforcement in Forsyth, Jones County, because a lot of them were suspect. And they knew they were either in the Klan or sympathized. But they had informants in the Klan. They said this guy came in, and his name, he was an FBI agent stationed in Law, Mississippi. His name was Robert E. Lee. I kid you not. That was the name of the agent. He came in, sat down, and took a notepad and wrote out a list of names. Said these were the individuals who did that. So the FBI knew who they were. So they did a good job of rounding them up. Okay? But the prosecutions the real heavy crimes, murder, arson, all of that, state charges. Okay? So I'll say this about the guys back then. They started off with a lot of vigor, but as time passed, the media moved away from it.
That's right. That's right.
Interest waned. The 2 or 3 that were convicted on arson charges end up in the state pen. One of the attorneys for some of the other ones who never came to trial ends up as the governor of the state of Mississippi.
Name him, sir. Name him.
Waller.
You don't say.
Yeah.
Give that first name.
William Waller.
We are being told we're
Okay,
out of time.
Yeah.
Doc, I know that we need to continue, and you always call things part 1.
Yeah.
So let's call this part 1, and we'll see when we can get Mr. Damer to
Sure.
come and share with us again. But since we are out of time, I'd
Okay.
like to give everybody a moment to give their closing remarks.
I'm going to yield to Mr. Damer.
Okay, well, what happened to my family was a very, very tragic event. And I've learned, just like all my brothers and everybody else, sisters and mother, you learn how to live with it and how to manage it so it doesn't destroy you. But if you are concerned about yourself, your family, what's going on in this state, and you want to honor my dad, or you want to help build a better Mississippi, if you're not registered, go register. If you are registered and you're not voting, let's start voting. Let's start forming some coalitions and pick the candidates that best represent our interests. And today, I'll say this, because I'm a political person, I vote Democratic, okay? I vote Democratic because that's the best option I see for us today in Mississippi.
Doris, you've been kind of quiet this evening. Your closing remarks.
Well, I just want to say to Mr. Damer that he, as a young boy, young man, you were traumatized. Your family was traumatized. And Black people have been traumatized for over 460-some years. And we have never gotten any kind of psychological treatment for this trauma. None of us. And that is why a lot of the things that are going on in our communities, we're turning on each other. The pain, all of the things that we're experiencing, we're turning on each other because we've never been helped. We've never been helped. This has been a trauma for Black people living in America, in this racist, white supremacy America's trauma. And we have not gotten the proper psychological help that we should have gotten and that we still need today. So I want to thank you for sharing your story with us tonight. I read about your dad, like I said, it was just like yesterday to me. So thank you for sharing that story. And we as Black people have just got to come together and support each other and do what we need to do for ourselves. We don't really need anybody else. We can do it.
Thank you,
And
Doris.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, this brings us to the close of our program this evening. But just this evening, this dialogue, this conversation has to continue, and it has to resonate all over the world. We must bring about change. We do not like the trajectory that we find our race moving in. We are sliding backwards. We have to stop the skid. Now, Doc always talks about a plan, a solution. We bring solutions to this program on how we do that. So it's critically important that you continue to listen, continue to support, continue to recognize the sacrifices that others have made that allow us to be sitting here today giving us the opportunity to try and become a first-class citizen.
Absolutely.
James Meredith said all he ever wanted to be was a first-class citizen.
Yep.
You don't need the Voting Rights Act, the 13th, the 14th Amendment. Just be a first-class citizen. And that's what we're striving for, and that's what we want. So when they ask, what do you want? You simply want to be a first-class citizen and enjoy the lives and the privileges that go along with being that. Doc, I've never heard you not have a closing remark, so I'll come to you one last time.
Well, I want to get Mr. Damer to agree to come back for part 2
Sure.
at his convenience in
Sure.
March.
Sure.
March, which is next month.
Sure.
And you
Sure.
work with Mr. Socrates, and you all work it out, and I'll do my best to be here. Because we want to talk about voting
Right.
and solutions to these problems
Absolutely.
that was covered at least 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
Can you handle that, sir?
Absolutely.
I know you can.
I welcome the opportunity to participate in these type forums. Hey, you can find me on Facebook, Dennis Damer, Hattiesburg, Mississippi. You'll see a lot of postings about current events as well as historical civil rights related events. You'll find me there. You'll find me on my produce farming page, Big Creole Farms. And you'll find me on another historical site I set up about that Rosenwald School building. Just search for Historic Bay Springs School Building. But the one with my name on it, Dennis Damer, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, that's where you'll get a chance to hear a lot of my opinions about things that are taking place in America. And I like to leave the audience with one thought. There's one tool that we have that we can exercise that can bring about change. And I know a lot of people are saying, hey, we voted, nothing never really happened, et cetera, et cetera. We got to get out of this defeatist mindset and let's coalesce, let's pull together, register if you're not a voter. If you're not registered, if you are registered and you're not voting, start voting. Just look at the returns in these last races, in this last gubernatorial race. The guy lost by about 27,000 votes. Okay? That's not a whole lot of votes. It's not. We could find that many black folks.
In Hinds County.
Oh, probably at least 50%. And I'm not trying to put out on anybody, but facts are facts. You know, we got that many people walking around where we could have swung that race. Now, granted, the Democrats are not perfect. They are not. Okay? They continue to make the same errors in these campaigns, and I'm not a spokesman for that party, but I see it as the best vehicle for us today. You know, the way they're running races in this state, where they basically take their core vote, the black vote, for granted, and you don't hear them start campaigning to black folks until it gets down to the 11th hour. That should have been the first thing when you first announced. You should have been with that group, because this ideology that somehow or another these folks on the MAGA right are just going to switch over to you, it ain't happening.
We want you to keep watching.
Yeah.
We Believe Digital. On YouTube is We Believe Podcast. On Facebook is We Believe Digital Podcast. Until tomorrow night, we have a special program that we're going to run tomorrow afternoon dealing with the issue between Israel and Palestine. And so Doc and I will be on a panel there, and I look forward to that. Hopefully we'll get back to the studio in time for our show tomorrow night here in the studio. Until then, we want you to stay safe and good night.
Good night.